started reading this book as well by Sergius Golowin. I ordered all his books very cheaply for $1 to $3 each. So I decided I wanted to really get into it, because it turns out he lived in the city I was born, and he was born in Czech Republic, and my father was Czech, so that's some synchronicity there, I guess. I'm also trying to piece my own ancestry together somewhat, because all the relatives, especially in Czech Republic, in Switzerland, there is also nobody around that I could ask. So, at least indirectly, I can learn something about the history of that time. Sergius Golowin was born 1930. That's more than 10 years earlier than my own father. But still, he more or less saw and experienced the same kind of shit this generation had to deal with World War II and having to flee and all that. So his family was separated. His dad lived in Paris while his mother came to Switzerland. But originally they were Russian. Sergius Golowin met many interesting people like Timothy Leary when he came to Switzerland to live in exile, or Friedrich Dürrenmatt, which is a Swiss author. And there are many books on the direct history of Bern, which I'm very much interested in, because this is some part of history you will not find anywhere else. And what he writes about is what I'm really fascinated by, and it is gathered information from people who have really lived it, had the knowledge about it, and this knowledge is just lost. You don't find that anymore. So I think these are very rare, valuable books to learn from. This one in particular is about the wise woman and their knowledge about healing. In 1958, Sergius Golowin had met by then 80-year-old man who lived in a wooden hut with a bed and some furniture, but otherwise this hut was filled to the brim with books he had gathered on magic, lore, herbalism, and all that. Books that you cannot find or buy anywhere anymore. He declared himself as a researcher of history in his own library, and he loved to share what he read with other people. But unfortunately, suddenly these people stayed away. They did not come anymore to learn from him, because they felt this kind of knowledge would harm their career, completely ignoring that their ancestor had been refugees, herbalists, traveling musicians, basket makers, or anything else of that sort. They wanted to forget about this kind of ancestry, and even went as far as to have fake passports made, so nobody could see their ancestry of being traveling people, gypsies, and such. They completely ignored their history. Sergius Golowin has met this man many, many times and learned about that kind of history. People traveled, houses on wheels drawn by horses. Back then it was a difficult time. First it was the Second World War, and then the new socialist government took over, and at first they were friendly to the traveling folk, trying to gain followers of all walks of life. But once they were in power, they prosecuted all these minorities and forced them into this new modern collectivism. Sergius Golowin met a refugee from Slovak origin who just had to go to Germany to get away from all that suppression. Socialism had done a number on my dad. He sure was traumatized from that, but he had taken over many things from what he was actually forced into. So he had a massive hatred for gypsies for whatever reason, and that was racist. There is no other word for it. But this is coming from this one. District commander of the gendarmerie in Litomyshl, speaking to the district authority there. It must first be clear that the opinions of the humanists who only know the gypsies from poetry or melancholy little songs are irrelevant, and their opinions must not be taken notice of, in the least, in our future work to subdue the gypsies, if we are to achieve our purpose and rid humanity of an evil worse than cancer. Czech Republic's dark secret gypsies. The Czech Republic's 2.9% unemployment rate is the lowest in Europe, but the rate for its gypsy men is 30%, reflecting widespread prejudice against a battered and hated minority. It's a terrible feeling when they won't let you in just because you have different color skin, says 25-year-old Gronzikova. A person feels degraded. The Czech Republic has surged ahead of its former communist neighbors in material terms, but shares one significant social problem with them: bad relations with the Romani. In almost every part of life, Romani encounter prejudice. They are discriminated against in housing, employment, and education. Landlords refuse them housing, employers refuse to hire them, and schools are reluctant to accept them as students. And, well, I have seen this. I have really experienced Czech people being extremely racist against gypsies when I was in Czech Republic visiting with my dad for a vacation. They really don't like gypsies. November 1939. Circular released by the Interior Ministry of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia to the provincial authorities in Brno and Prague. The bodies and offices under your direction shall be tasked with calling on all gypsies to settle permanently by the end of January 1940 and to cease their itinerant ways. Their nomad documents will also be confiscated. Whoever does not obey will be assigned to the disciplinary labor camps. This is what was going on. A way of life being confiscated, forbidden. January 1940. Police Directorate in Brno, speaking to the provincial authority there. Because of the nature of the gypsies' race and their Semitic origins, their strong clannish instinct and inborn tendency to wander the world must be subjected to the strictest legal measures ever to be issued for the control of gypsy malfeasance. You see the hatred. This is originated back then, and my dad still had that kind of hatred that has been instilled to him by politics. It's always the fucking governments who brainwash people to behave in a certain way. March 1942. Government Edict Number 89 on the preventive control of crime. For the purpose of protecting society from wrongdoers, police preventive custody is enacted. The police preventive custody is being performed in special internment camps. The length of such police preventive custody is not subject to restriction. February 1943. General Commander of the Undercover Protectorate Police in Bohemia, speaking to Government Counsel Dr. Schneider in German. It has been established that the quarantine of the gypsies in Hodonin could be cancelled before the end of this month because we have not yet discovered any cases of spotted typhus, so the gypsies can be transported to Auschwitz after thorough delousing and disinfecting of their clothing. The transport of the gypsies will be accomplished on the basis of the SS Reichskommandant's order of December 16, 1942. So all that was going on. And so much later still, this hatred. August 1943. Criminal Police Directorate on the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia in Brno to the General Commander of the Undercover Criminal Police in Prague in German. On August 21 and August 22, 1943, transport of 767 gypsies to Auschwitz was performed. On August 22, 1943, at 5:30, the transport was handed over to the German gendarmerie in Moravska Ostrava for further transport to Auschwitz. The transport and handover of the gypsies took place without a single flaw. Like fucking objects handled over. After the gypsies were transported away, there remain 32 persons at this time in gypsy camp, 2 in Hodonin by Kunstadt. February 44. Criminal Police Directorate of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia in Brno, to the criminal police there, with respect to the final solution of the gypsy question, i.e. the expatriation of gypsies from the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. This was fulfilled, and thereby the following decrees are no longer necessary. The Nazi genocide of the Romani people concurred with the prevailing prejudices against this minority in Europe prior to the Nazis' rise to power. Measures taken by the authorities in those days grew out of the xenophobic position of society back then. For people living in Europe during the 1930s, it was not necessarily curious or disturbing, and in most cases it was not curious or disturbing for there to be a gradually radicalizing tendency heading towards suppressing the rights of various groups and eventually leading to the so-called final solution. Yeah. And in some ways, history is always repeating itself. Suppression of minorities in one way or another. They had taught him that science was the same everywhere. However, this was not true at all. So, as a refugee in Germany, he had to repeat the whole exam just to be able to work, while the traveling folk was pushed aside by this total industrialization, being forced to live in slums. So, therefore, this Slovak had to move to yet another country, learn another language, and study for the third time. Was crushing to him, and he sighed. His grandfather, who also was traveling from one place to another, at least his grandfather, had not been forced to relearn the same things in different countries. He could at least use the same herbal remedies to help people. So, because of all of this, the health of this gypsy Slovak was suffering. He tried to adapt, and although on the outside it looked like he had done well, on the inside he was torn. He had a nice house and a car and all that. However, he was disillusioned. Whenever a society suppresses a minority, it for sure will have an impact on that minority, because their roots are being cut. Usually, politics don't protect such minorities. The things that are voted for are usually making things more complicated for the little people.